welcome to another episode of Out of the Woodwork podcast, brought to you by Axminster Tools with me, Sean Evelegh. Today I am joined by Hattie Speed, a talented designer and maker. She is an advocate for encouraging young people to take up woodworking as a career and particularly working to inspire more women into creative careers. She is the founder of This Girl Makes, which is an on and offline community of makers and designers that aims to celebrate and promote women in craft and design. So Hattie, thank you for joining me today.
No worries, it's nice to speak with you, Sean.
Yeah, well, a lot of people won't know, we actually both studied at Reiko Wood Furniture Centre. Can you give us, I think you left a year before I started, to be honest.
Yes, I don't remember there being an overlap, but now that I'm a teacher there, I definitely remember seeing you when I popped my head into the workshop every now and then. So, yeah. And
I think when I was in secondary school, my A-level piece was entered into the Young Furniture Makers Awards, which you, I think, won that year for the university section.
Okay.
Our paths crossed quite early, but we would not have known.
Yeah.
So can you give us, for people that don't know, a background on yourself and your education?
Sure thing. My name's Hattie Speed. I grew up in Northumberland in a town called Hexham, so quite a rural place. And went to sixth form after school and did product design, product design A-level, which is sort of where it all started really. And then I was always certain that I was going to go to college after sixth form to do an art foundation year, having always been very creative. And that's like a course where you do lots of different creative subjects and then you decide which one you want to specialise in. So I specialised in 3D design and was always very interested in designing, but had a real thirst to learn making because I kind of felt like the two go hand in hand. And so I explored different options, so potentially a cabinet making apprenticeship. So went for an interview for that. And that's where I found out about Reiko Wood, because that's where the person interviewing me had studied. And if it wasn't for them, my life would have followed a very different course. So very grateful to them and their recommendation. I'm very patriotic of being from the north, so I never thought I'd leave. But yeah, I find myself living in Oxford 6 years after graduating. So feel a bit of a traitor, but I live and work in Oxford now and do lots of different woodworking jobs, having done the furniture design and make degree at Reiko Wood.
One thing about Reiko Wood is there's a lot of making, which I loved. Would you say it's made you more of a maker or more of a designer after leaving?
I think I went into it having more experience in design and those sort of skills. And so I was really there for the making, and the fact that you got your own workbench in the workshop for the whole 3 years was exactly what I wanted. I didn't want a typical university experience. I wanted to just be in there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, like slogging and learning as much as I could. So I became more of a maker while I was there, but now that I've left, the two are very much important to me. So I would describe myself as a designer maker for sure. Okay,
so after Reiko Wood, I hear you worked for Urco, which must have been an amazing experience. Can you tell us what you were doing for them?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of shocked that I got employed, to be honest, as a graduate. But I think they just, they want to support young people and give them experience in industry. I got employed as a design engineer. So that is sort of an in-between role between, I was based in the design department, but I very much had to go down to the factory and the production team and kind of liaise with them. So it wasn't the most creative role. I would say it's more problem solving and kind of working out how a design is actually going to be made. So doing a lot of the CAD models, the drawings, talking with the jig shop about how the prototype's going to be made versus how it's going to actually be made in production. And also doing jobs if they were going to exhibitions, like designing the stand or the layout of the furniture for exhibitions and shops. I got a bit of experience doing loads of things, and as well as doing some education projects, so collaborating with schools and with Reiko Wood itself. So yeah.
So you now actually teach back at Reiko Wood. It must be really rewarding seeing the students get so much enjoyment out of it, and seeing them learn new skills. You know, the knowledge you're passing down. How important is teaching to you?
I think I actually come from a family of teachers. Like, a lot of my family work in education, whether that's university or primary schools. So I think it's kind of in my blood to want to share knowledge. And I think my teaching experience started even when I was a student. I initiated running workshops in the local community whilst I was still learning. And to me, that's almost, I was paying my university fees to study, and it almost felt a bit like, the Robin Hood. I'm kind of taking from the university and I'm sharing that knowledge with people for like a fraction of the cost. And so it's really important to me just sharing in this kind of collaborative process of learning, because as you're teaching someone, you're also learning and kind of developing your own practice. So I think it's just as beneficial to me as it is for students. And yeah, it's really nice being back at Reiko Wood in that capacity. I run the Saturday club there, which is a free course for 13 to 16-year-olds. And it's usually done over 15 weeks. And essentially what I want to try and do with that, they don't get a qualification out of it, but they do just get an introduction to designing and making. So the main outcome is that it has to be fun and engaging. And I think all the feedback I've got's been really positive. So I feel like I've been successful in sort of creating that environment for the students.
And you got to plan the projects they made. It wasn't a set thing. So what projects do you make with them?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I'd just been given the keys to, like, I don't know, to just having an amazing time. I was just given total freedom over writing the course, which when you're young, when you're new to the teaching practice, that's like such a big responsibility. So I was really grateful for that. So what we made the first year, we did a couple of introductory projects just to get the students to know each other and comfortable in the workshop, and introduce them to hand tools. And then we just launched straight into making their final project. I think maybe over 12 weeks, they made a small sort of table stool type thing. It had 2 side frames that were bridle jointed together, and then the other 2 rails were kind of dowel jointed through the bridle joint. So yeah, two joints that they learnt, and they all did that cut by hand. And then we did a veneered plywood top as well, which in hindsight was an incredibly ambitious project to do with 16 young people. A lot of the time I was teaching them on my own. So it was very full on, but it was incredibly rewarding to see their faces at the end of the course and just seeing their progression. I think there was one 12-year-old who'd snuck in, and he was the student that just sort of excelled the most, despite only being 12. It was amazing to see.
Wow. So yeah, these were complete beginners, I imagine, but had an interest in making. And I guess they weren't allowed to use the machines at Reiko Wood?
Well, so I did allow, under very close supervision, they were allowed to use like bandsaw, disc sander and pillow drill. And and a lot, when I was at school and in education, you were allowed to use machines and things, but just under very like small parameters. Yeah, either the teacher had to be there, or like you weren't given that much freedom or opportunities to explore the machines. And I think the fact that they were able to have that experience in the Saturday club, they all said was like the main thing they enjoyed. So I think just obviously making sure it's done safely, but just giving students that freedom and responsibility, I think they really appreciate.
Yeah, that is an amazing experience. I definitely wish I did that when I was that age. So Same. It sounds like Reiko, it sounds like Reiko Wood is a big part of your journey. And while you were studying there in your final years, like I mentioned, you were in the Young Furniture Makers Awards, winning the Best in Show in 2018. How has that helped you and your journey and your business?
Yeah, I mean, I can even remember that moment. There were three categories or two categories. There was definitely a design and a bespoke category. And I think I was put into the bespoke category. And then actually a friend of mine, Beatrice Bray, won that one. So I heard her name called out and was obviously very pleased for her, but was like, oh, well, I've not won my category, but hey ho. So I sort of like turned off a little bit and started chatting to my friends. And then I just heard my name called out, and then I just like clocked eyes with everyone and was just like, what's going on?
Did you not know what it was for?
I think I did, but I just completely... It was for award for Best in Show, sponsored by Blum. And to me, that was just so out of my reach that I just was like, oh, well, I'm not even going to like listen for my name because it's obviously not going to be me. And then it was. So I had to go up to the stage just kind of paralyzed with laughter because I was just like, this is so unexpected. But at the same time, I was just like, it was it genuinely felt like an honor or like a real recognition, because the piece that it was for was called Corky's Cabinet. It was the final piece that I made whilst at Reiko Wood, the piece that I made in response to my dissertation, and it had such an incredible personal meaning to me. It came out of my research into like the power of craft as a healing process for those who've been bereaved. So, and that comes out of a personal experience. So to have such a recognition for such a personal piece, it was just, like one of the highlights of my furniture making journey today, I'd say.
Yeah, I bet. So after winning, what other opportunities have come your way, and how has that helped you with your future endeavours?
I feel like I've been really lucky since graduating. Getting the Urco job was amazing. I was with them for a year, and whilst I was there, as I said, got lots of opportunities to work doing education projects, and one of them being a self-initiated project called Creative Clinic, where we worked with Didcot Girls' School, and we went in, me and two other members of staff, Urco staff. We went in with loads of Urco components that had, they weren't suitable for production, e.g. they had cracks in the wood or slight splits, they were like seconds essentially. So we just sort of raided the bins, took a load of Urco components, which, if to anyone that knows Urco in their design, it's quite iconic, like the smooth rounded shapes. They're just like beautiful objects in themselves. So we got to take a load of those and then just let the students basically design and make whatever they wanted from these components. And the winning team came up with like this really cool... I can't even say what it was. It was just sort of a structure that a child would sit in, and they'd move objects around as like a little play space for children. So it was, so that was great. Urco, supported me doing that, and they also sponsored an exhibition that I had at the old fire station in Oxford. So incredibly supportive. And I think the longer that I was there and doing those type of projects, I realised education is so important to me, and that's kind of the direction I want to go in. So I left Urco, had a few months out just to sort of focus on This Girl Makes and kind of have a bit of a breather, because I felt like I'd just been running non-stop and I just needed a bit of a rest. And then I got the job with the NHS, which I still do now, so that's 3 days a week. And I work in a rehab facility, so with people who've had brain injuries or strokes, and we do woodwork with them as part of them, either relearning like cognitive skills like problem solving, or they might only have use of one hand and they need to learn how to adapt to that that major life-changing thing, which I find that incredibly rewarding. It's really good. Yeah.
So obviously education is now a big part of your life. You touched on This Girl Makes, but that's so impressive. You're the founder of This Girl Makes, if people don't know. Can you tell us about what it's all about and why it's so important?
So yeah, I started This Girl Makes, which is I describe it as a project because even though it does have income streams, so it is sort of a business. I don't do it for the money. I do it for the social cause that it stands for. And I started it at college in my second year because whilst I was at Reiko Wood, there was about 20% of the students that were women. And I think that number gradually dropped off as I progressed through the course. And I think now there's probably less than 20% of the students that are female, so or identify as female. So I just, as a woman myself, when I was in that environment, especially at a young age, when you're trying to figure out who you are and who you want to be, I just thought it should be more of an issue that people are talking about and trying to understand why this is the case and how we can maybe make it better. Because I believe that a more balanced environment is going to be beneficial to everyone. So I went about writing a blog called This Girl Makes, which interviewed women in craft and design, and more just as a selfish thing. I needed to find myself role models, people I could identify with, people that I could potentially be in the future, just to help me kind of motivate me through the course. And then writing the blog sort of turned into offering workshops, as I've mentioned. So going into community spaces like galleries, museums, community centres, and working with different groups of people and bringing craft to them and just engaging them with it. And I work with lots of different people, all different ages, abilities and genders. But there is a real focus on trying to diversify the types of people that are interested in woodwork, because I found it such a healing process. So I feel like I should share that with as many people who are interested. And so today, This Girl Makes, I work at Reiko Wood. A lot of the workshops I offer are via them, because they've obviously got amazing facilities, and the rest of the teachers are a great resource. So it's good to be around them and able to ask them questions. And I think for the future, I think I'd quite like to maybe develop This Girl Makes a bit more, make it more, have more of a structured business model. So it's something I could potentially do more full time, or go freelance and kind of just offer more things, basically.
Yeah, I think it's very important getting more women in the industry. Do you think woodwork is taught in a way at the moment, maybe a bit old-fashioned, or is taught in a way that is putting off the women?
Good question. I think it's a multifaceted issue, and there's lots of factors that contribute to this kind of disparity in gender representation in the industry. And obviously education is a massive part of that. So when I was a student at A-level, the technology department were all men, and older men as well. So a bit harder to relate when there's such a big age gap as well. But actually the year that I took A-level, they hired the first female teacher, and she was like a newly qualified teacher as well. So that made a massive difference to my experience. And then also when I was at Reiko Wood in the second year, they employed Dr. Lynn Jones as a tutor. And again, that it almost seems like these things happened and for a reason, because they like really sparked inspiration, just having someone in the teaching team that was somebody I could relate more to. So having women teachers for women students is really important, I think. But also just for everyone, it's not just, oh, this is a space for women and it's only going to help them. I think feminism is also for men, and it's about just making society and systems more inclusive and actually beneficial. And I don't have an official framework that I do my teaching to, or specific model I refer to, but I'd say I definitely take more of a human approach. I kind of try and change my approach as a teacher in order to meet the student. And I mean, a bit like, especially if I'm working in a therapeutic context, I think it's really important to be there for the student in a sort of guidance way, like emotionally, but also, you know, what's their learning style? How can I actually communicate the information in a way that's going to register with them and keep them engaged and motivated? Because a massive part of learning is your emotional connection with the subject. And I think, you know, I have a massive emotional connection to woodwork. So I feel like that helps me as a teacher be a bit more empathetic to students.
Yeah. So to get more of the younger people interested in woodworking and know it's an option, you know, for the secondary schools, there's a few that still have design technology, but in primary school, there's sort of no making at all. Do you think it should be, you know, offered to a younger age, and sort of some sort of workshop should be implemented at the primary school age?
So it's interesting because in my experience of education, I went to a 3-tier system. So first school, middle school and high school. So when people talk about primary, I have to remind myself that's year 1 to 6, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the younger, the better, you know, I think the tactile haptic skills of making and exploring the world through our hands, is just, it's like it's a thing that goes right back to like caveman times. It's such a natural and primitive thing that humans do. So I think, you know, that should be part of learning in primary schools for sure. And also I think I guess we live in like a health and safety conscious society. So the thought of giving saws and chisels and planes to like a bunch of kids is seen as scary. But if it's done in a sort of controlled, smaller, more intimate environment, then there's absolutely no reason young people can't get involved. And just to sort of as an example, a maker called Peter Lanyon, who does a lot of green woodwork, who I know, I see on his Instagram, he does loads of making with his really young daughter, and she's even making like little chairs for her bunny rabbit toy and is now selling those to her friends. So I just think that's a lovely example of where, you know, nobody's ever too young to start making, basically.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to change the topic. So what perception of woodworking would you like changed? So, for example, my perception I'd like changed is I don't think woodworking is sort of seen as an art form. You know, people, when they talk about the art forms, they see paintings on the wall and sculptures. But I believe if people start seeing woodworking in furniture as and us as artists, then people would understand, appreciate handmade furniture more. So that's my opinion. But is there any perception of woodworking you'd like changed?
Well, I definitely agree with you. The number of times, and a lot of them recently, I've been, somebody said, "Oh, could you make some furniture for me?" And then I'll say, "Okay, it'll probably be ballpark figure this much," and then they're blown away. And I just think, well, you know, if you wanted something cheap, why don't you go to IKEA? But if you're asking me to make it, then you've got to take into account all my time and energy that goes into problem solving and bringing that piece into existence. So I fully get your point. So I think that, and I think, there's just a lot of stereotypes, and it happens a lot, even in my NHS job, where I work with an older man called John, who's been a great mentor. And a lot of the time people will automatically speak to him rather than speaking to me, because they just assume I'm like the apprentice who is not trained in woodwork. And although John is a lot older than me, so he has a lot more, knowledge and experience, I have my own knowledge and experience, and I've done a lot of things that he's actually not done. So, for example, we bought a Festool domino jointer for the workshop recently, trying to get it into the 21st century finally. And that's been a great thing to, make more complex projects with patients, especially those who are maybe retraining to go back to work, because it's like an industry standard tool. And he'd never used one before. So if anything, I'm the expert on that. So I think this perception that if, it's for older men, and actually it's not, it's a craft that requires a certain set of knowledge and skills and a real enthusiasm. And if anyone has that, it's they can excel in the craft. And I think, I don't know, I feel I could think more about it and offer you some more examples, but that's the main one. That's the main bugbear for me.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. Well, I also, I've experienced that in a way in terms of my age, because, being very young, and it's seen as quite a mature sort of hobby or industry. So if I was in a room with a bunch of other woodworkers who are much older, they would look at me and think, what does he know? So I know exactly what you're talking about there. What's the most rewarding thing about the whole woodworking process, from the design to the end result?
Working with people is the most rewarding, and I think this is also partly the reason I haven't gone and got a job as a maker in a workshop. Is the thing I enjoy most is actually working with people and bringing their ideas to life and kind of collaborating and, coming up with something unique and original that's not necessarily a product and more of the process. And I don't want to necessarily be on a factory line just churning out things. I want to, work in a more holistic, slower way with people. So to me, that's rewarding.
Yeah. But you mentioned you do want to sort of get back in the industry and start making your own furniture again.
Yeah. So, I'm very, I'm trying to juggle a lot of things at the moment, but I have just agreed to do a commission for someone. So I've sort of set up a workshop in my garage, and I've also got a few friends who've got their own workshops. So collaborating with them is hopefully a way where I can actually start doing my own practice alongside all the other jobs that I'm doing.
Yeah. And would you say you have a style in your design and making?
I definitely have a visual style that kind of developed as I was at Reiko Wood, and it's something I really want to develop more and kind of explore more, which hence the garage workshop. And I would describe it as, I really like honest construction, so visible joints, like wedged or pegged joints.
Yeah.
I just think they have a real, they sort of tell the narrative of the piece and how it was made, and they're just visually quite interesting. And also I just really like wood. So as soon as you start adding like metal brackets and hinges and fixtures and fittings, it all becomes a bit too mechanical for me. And I just really like, tapping a dowel into a hole. That's just a really nice, it almost takes you back to childhood, just sort of like, wooden blocks and things. So I think, to me, I want my pieces to feel fun and playful and make you feel a sense of enjoyment when you see them or interact with them. So Corky's cabinet, the piece that won Best in Show at the Young Furniture Makers exhibition, that has a lot of curves to it. It has like little fingers, which are the sides of the drawers that extend beyond the cabinet. So it almost looks like two little hands that are reaching out to you. And then you pull the fingers to open the drawer, and then essentially it looks like the cabinet is trying to give you a hug. So, wow. It's a playful piece. It does have a function, but I'm not trying to just I'm not trying to take on board IKEA and just like make really functional pieces. I want to make something that's a bit more fun and interactive, and like a piece of art, as you said. I would consider myself an artist as well.
That's your point of exposed joints. I really resonate with, and I heard a phrase a while ago about honest woodworking, about if the customer can see the handmade element to it, like the handmade joinery, then they can appreciate the amount of work that goes into it. And if you are buying a handmade piece, why would you want it to look like it was mass produced? Is one way to look at it. So showing the hand cut joints is a really good way of doing that, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned, well, obviously we know you won the prize and you've experienced entering a competition and winning, but now you're doing a bit of judging. For example, the competition Axminster is running. What do you look for when you're judging a piece now?
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously, a good piece of furniture, it needs to sort of, be well made. It needs to not fall apart, and have some element of functionality to it. So I think there's kind of like the basics you look for as a judge, and just like, is it fit for purpose, that type of thing. But maybe it doesn't need to be fit for purpose if there's more of a concept behind it. And I think as long as that is communicated by the maker in a way that I can understand as a judge, then I will consider the narrative of the piece just as much as the kind of physical, structure of it. So yeah, as in my work, I really want to tell a story. So I'm always trying to look at another maker's piece and think, what are they trying to communicate to me? And does it resonate? Or maybe it doesn't resonate with me, but how successful have they been in trying to communicate that concept? For example, I was a guest judge for the Alan Peters Award last year, which was online for the first time, and it didn't win, but one of the pieces that was entered happened to be a friend of mine called Freddie Keane, and he graduated from the Royal College of Art and did a master's in furniture making there. And his piece, he entered his final piece, and that was sort of a wedge, 3-wedge tenon stool. So quite sort of, basic kind of principle of making a stool. But he designed it to be made by people who are partially sighted or completely blind. So in order to kind of, make it inclusive of people who aren't able to see, he'd put almost like braille type details into the wood so they could identify which part of the component it was and which slot it went into. And I just thought that was done with a real, just a real sort of sensitivity, and aesthetically it looked lovely because you had all these kind of punctured marks in the wood, or like dimples in the wood. Which I really appreciated that, because one, it's trying to make craft more inclusive, and two, it was just done in a really nice way, and presented lovely. So, yeah.
Well, we just had Chris Fisher, the blind wood turner, on the podcast, and I think he would be really interested in that. So hopefully he's listening and he'll check that out. Out of the Woodwork is brought to you by Axminster Tools. Nobody is more passionate or knowledgeable about woodworking than us. A market leader in mail order tools and the machinery industry, we offer a friendly and personal service to thousands of woodworkers all around the world. Whether you're a trade professional, business owner, education leader, amateur DIYer, or a hobby enthusiast, we share your passion. Discover more about Axminster Tools. Visit www.axminstertools.com. So when you're judging yourself and you're looking at a lot of other pieces, does that inspire work? Where do you find inspiration from?
I consider myself a very creative person, and I'm very sensitive to things. So I think just day to day, all around me, I can be inspired or be given an emotion by something which might trigger a kind of creative brainstorming process. I'm very much a social person, so I think my interactions with people and hearing their stories can really motivate me, and I definitely like to retreat and kind of have time to process and think about ideas. So, you know, as much as I'm social and like to be around people, when I actually come to design and make, I definitely need quiet space and a sort of space in a workshop where I can just sort of put my head down and focus. And I grew up, I grew up with a great aunt who was a potter. She's the only kind of crafts person in my family. I don't come from a family of makers. And I think just growing up around here, where her house, she's made most of the things in her house, and she's got lots of art books all around the house. So whenever I go and visit, I just, you know, I find it an incredibly inspiring environment to be in.
So for anyone struggling to find inspiration or hasn't really got a design process, have you got any advice for anyone starting out and struggling in that area?
It's a really good question because, I think there's no, you can't tell someone how to design. Well, I mean, you can show them strategies and kind of tips, but I think ultimately it's a personal thing. So I think you kind of almost have to lay down all the options and then people pick and choose what resonates with them. So for me, when I was at Reiko Wood, the process that I developed kind of came out of my interest in illustration and sketchbooking and collage. So, you know, right from the point where we get given the creative brief, I will go away and do visual research. So things that I think of when I read the brief, or just sort of associations I'm making or areas that I want to focus on whilst during the project. And I'll print off all those pictures and I will cut them up and almost make like collaged bits of furniture. So I might have a leg from one bit of furniture that I like, or I might have an object that's completely not related to furniture as a tabletop. So just as a really quick way of sketching out what's in my brain, because even though I love drawing, I wouldn't say I'm really good at drawing things that don't currently exist. So to me, collage is a really good way of actually just getting those ideas onto paper. And then once I've done that, I'll then start actually thinking, okay, it's a bit of furniture. How's this going to be made with wood, or whatever material I choose? And then I'll start actually sketching those ideas out and do 3D sketching with bits of wood and actual model making. And I think, that's a process that I kind of came to and that I find really useful. So for anyone else who doesn't think they are that great at drawing or don't feel that confident, then try collage. I think it's also just quite a fun process to do. And again, like 3D sketching, you can actually just find offcuts and actually stick them together as a sort of 3D drawing. So those are some recommendations I'd give to students.
I definitely agree with the collaging and mood boards. And you mentioned you don't find it easy drawing something that doesn't exist. One thing I've tried in the past that the listeners might find useful is if you want to design a chair and you print out lots of pictures of chairs you like the look of, if you get some tracing paper and you lay them over the top of the chair and kind of trace over the chairs, but move the positioning of the components, maybe lower the rail, or I find that really interesting because you can adapt all the designs you like. And then after all those tracing over already existing designs, you might be able to come up with something unique. So you're currently studying for your PGCE. Can you tell us more about that? And because I can imagine that's really exciting for you. Yeah,
it's been a really great opportunity, again, that just sort of came along at the right time and everything fitted into place. So I'm currently working for Reiko Wood as a teacher. So they've actually sponsored for me to do this teaching qualification, which I just jumped at because it's a recognised qualification and I think it'll just validate me as an educator. And wherever I work, it's going to be almost like a proof that I am capable. And it's just been, I have tons of enthusiasm and motivation to do teaching, but this qualification has just helped me order that process. So planning, proper preparation, how to think about learners' needs and how best to support them. And it's I have to do 2 two, placements. So the Saturday club is one placement and my hospital job is the other. And then, so I do those and I have observed sessions and get feedback. And then I also learn all the theory and kind of sort of techniques of teaching in 1 day a week as a student. And so all of that together over the past 2 years has just it made my teaching practice just excel. I have a lot more confidence now in approaching big groups of learners. And one thing I always used to do was just get so stressed out and panic. And I realized that is just the worst thing you can do and it's not going to help anyone. So just actually learning to like take a step back and breathe, and there's no rush, just sort of like I will help people as I am able to. That's been one of the main takeaways from the whole experience. And yeah, once I finish, I'm going to have a bit more free time. So I'm hoping I can put that free time into doing stuff in my home workshop and actually doing more freelance kind of designing and making for people.
So a lot of your teaching is in person. Have you thought about doing any remote teaching or some video tutorials or lectures online?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, that was the big thing posed by the pandemic, was how do we keep our teaching and craft alive when everything's now virtual? And so definitely try to explore that. At the hospital, outpatients weren't allowed to come in. So we kind of considered doing like a blended approach. So maybe they start off doing a couple of sessions in person when or if they're able to, and then they take their components home and assemble them at home or finish them at home, and we do like a virtual call, so we can talk them through the process or they can ask questions, or potentially one thing I tried to do as part of This Girl Makes is develop like kits that we can post out to people. They can assemble them at home. Some are for more younger learners or, more entry-level making skills. And then some are slightly more advanced and require hand tools and things. And then I recorded myself making the project and they were able to sort of build at home along with the video.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and a lot of those projects I offered in person anyway, so actually converting it to online was a relatively easy process, but a really interesting process nonetheless from a teaching point of view, trying to think how do you communicate everything they need to know in a video, and I know you've got loads of experience of that. That's sort of what you do, really, isn't it? So
I think kits are a really good idea, actually, especially in the pandemic. What kits did you make, and are you going to make more of them?
So I've got two that I currently offer. One is a sort of CNC'd plywood toolbox design, which is sort of pegged together with dowels. There's not a lot of like making involved. It's more assembling and kind of, working out what component goes where, and then people get to finish it in whatever way they choose. So that's great for, as I say, like younger learners. But also, I've done that with quite a few patients from the workshop at the NHS because, if you think about somebody who's had a stroke, they might have a weaker side. So actually getting them to do a task that's two-handed and involves them actually having to like push things together and slot things into holes. I think there's a lot of people in woodworking who just take for granted how involved some of the skills are, and to somebody who's had a life-changing incident like a stroke, trying to relearn those basic skills of just using your two hands or trying to do a dexterous task, there's so much involved, and cognitive as well, trying to like orientate components. So I think just have more of an appreciation of how difficult the craft is, and actually like, especially, this is a shout out to anyone who's learning. When I was at Reiko Wood, I doubted myself all the time, and I still do. And no matter how much you learn or how many awards you win, I always didn't think it was good enough. So I just want to say to anyone who's learning, like, it's a really hard craft, and there's a reason it takes many years to get to a standard. And so just be kind to yourself. You know, every lesson is important, and every mistake is a lesson. So yeah, just keep going basically, and don't give up. The second kit is one of these hexagonal stools, which has got a 3-wedge tenon joint there. So this is essentially all the components are already prepared, and they're mailed out to somebody, and then they do the kind of gluing up, tapping the wedge in, and using a flush saw for the top, and perhaps a block plane. So just as a little introduction to all the basic hand tools and kind of skills involved. Again, we take so much for granted, and actually to somebody who's never done woodwork, there's so much to learn just in that 2-hour workshop that they might do. So yeah.
Yeah, that definitely is going to get people inspired to want to start making. And your point of, you know, don't be hard on yourself, is we've both been woodworking for a long time. I'm coming up on 11 years being woodworking, and I'm still learning. And even if you're incredibly experienced, there's still so much to learn. You'll never stop learning. I saw an interview from a woodworker who I think's, you know, 70 years old, and he said he's still learning every single day. And while I was at Reiko Wood, you were doing dovetail training, and the first dovetail you cut was terrible. And I think we had to cut 5 dovetails in a morning or in a day in the first year. And you just saw the progression from each one. And it's amazing. You think you can only see progression over, you know, years, you know, of work, but just repeating a dovetail in a morning, you know, you can see the progression. So definitely don't be hard on yourself for any beginners listening. Just try and enjoy it, you know, and if the dovetail doesn't come out right, then if it came out perfect, I'd be worried, then what is there to learn? Because learning is the fun part, definitely.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I think when I went to Reiko Wood, I started when I must have been about 19. So yeah, you know, in the grand scheme of things, that's still incredibly young. And I think when I went there, the thing I really wanted to learn was just how to use all the tools, how to actually make things. And so that's what I was focusing all my energy and attention on, and got me really excited. And then since leaving college and actually like working now and having to help other people make, I'm now learning all the other things that are involved. And I never grew up with an appreciation of tools or even an understanding of how they worked or what they were really. And only now I'm kind of understanding why it's so important to know about tools, and you know, sharpening being the main example of that. If you don't have a sharp tool, then you're going to make the job a lot harder for yourself. So not just the creative making side of things, but also like the maintenance side of things. I think that's what I'm now appreciating and having to learn more about. So yeah, always learning.
Yeah, definitely. Learning the inside and out of a machine is really interesting. What do you wish you knew before you started woodworking? I
think I'd always done drawing and kind of came from an illustration, graphic design sort of background. And so I think I was used to working in 2D, and then actually changing to thinking in 3D. Yeah, as I said, you take so much for granted, and like some people's brains are just wired in different ways, or, you know, if you don't have lots of experience as a child making, it means it's harder for you to then think in those kind of ways as you get older. So I think when I started at Reiko Wood, I felt really insecure about my inability to think in 3D and visualize things, which is now completely different. I feel like now I've managed to sort of exercise that part of my brain, but yeah, I think just going into college and people describing things, and I was like, I'm totally lost. I need to draw it in order to visualize what you're saying. So yeah, I think had I had that ability going into Reiko Wood, I would have, you know, excelled even quicker. So
yeah. Well, before we go, for anyone wanting to find your work and learn more about you, where can everyone find you?
They can find me on my website, theskillmakes.com, and you can also contact me there. I'd love to hear from everyone and anyone. And I'm also on Instagram. There's my private account, which is hat_speed. And there's also this at theskillmakes. So you can give me a follow and drop me a message if you've got any questions or want to collaborate. I'm always open to meeting new people and doing new projects.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining me, Hattie. I really enjoyed it. It's great talking to you, and I'm sure the listeners really enjoyed it as well.
Oh, thanks so much, Sean. It was lovely to speak to you too.
Yeah, see you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Join us again next time for another episode of Out of the Woodwork. For more episodes, to listen and subscribe, search for Out of the Woodwork on all major podcast sites, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For more woodworking project guides, demos, tools, reviews, and more, visit www.axminstertools.com.